Has everyone had a chance to take a look at that?
I'll make a motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? 0. I'll take that as, I'll go through the lineup. It's a 4-0 for approval.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have to have,
A roll call? A
Yeah.
roll call vote? Rob Bamber, how do you vote?
aye.
Ernie, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brian, how do you vote?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. So it's a 4-0 and 1 absent. The next item on the agenda. Actually, I don't have it in front of me on my packet.
Mr. Chairman, it's continued hearing, site plan review, redevelopment of existing Big Way supermarkets, 420 to 442 Walpole Street. Philip Mackey, attorney, Cedar Realty Trust owner.
Thank you. Mr. Mackey, or Patrick, is it up? Do we have anything to add before we begin on this, or should I hand this over to Mr. Mackey?
So Nathan from Bull Engineering is currently presenting. So I don't know if it's up to them how they want to kind of give an overview of what the changes are since last time we met.
Okay.
If Phil wants to talk, or if Nate wants to talk.
And that's what.
Sorry about that. I'm getting some echo on my audio. I'm not sure why. All right, let's see. There we go. That should work better. My apologies.
All right, Mr. Chairman, Phil Mackey here. I got one procedural question I need to ask. As we only have 4 members right now, should the chair not make it in tonight, do you have the Mullen rule?
Yes, the Mullen rule is available. This is not a special permit, so it may not be needed to invoke that. But yes, the board can choose to do the Mullen rule and do a transcript and participate in a final vote.
All right, that's fine, and hopefully it doesn't need that, but I'd hate to find us a vote short.
It looks like Mr. Poro is showing up though.
Yes, I am.
Mr. Pearl has showed up, so we can hand this over to him.
Okay. Nathan, are you
Yes. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So since the last time we were here, I just want to give you a quick update as to where we stand. We have provided updated plans in response to comments to address comments received from town staff, as well as what was discussed at the last meeting. Some of these highlights include removal of 17 parking spaces to include 5 additional landscaped islands, and trees have been added to the landscape plan throughout the proposed landscaped areas. In addition to that, we've detailed some additional stormwater improvements and provided additional technical data as requested by the town engineer. We have received an updated letter from the town engineer today. stating that his comments have been satisfactorily addressed. And we did have some additional discussions with the planner earlier today regarding one comment from the Board of Health centralized around pedestrian access for the redevelopment. There's a quick little sketch here. I'm going to switch over. Basically, what was discussed earlier is we're looking at adding a few additional crosswalks at the end of each parking row or access aisle that would bring foot traffic to the front of the store to provide better pedestrian access. Wanted to show this tonight to the board as to what we've discussed with the planner earlier today. If there were no questions or comments coming out of this, we would incorporate these into the final plan of record. The applicant has also had extensive discussions with some of the neighbors, and I believe they have one agreement officially worked out with one of the neighbors over off of Davis. It was a gentleman, Mr. Cochran, who spoke at the last meeting. And at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Charles Burkett from Cedar Realty, can provide you an update relative to these discussions, and we'll actually get into a little bit on the construction phasing plans.
Mr. Davis? Nathan, is that who you turned it over to, Mr. Davis?
No, Charles from Cedar Realty.
Thank you.
Looks like Mr. Burkhardt is on mute.
Casey, do you know if Charles is on and available, or would you be able to walk through some of the items with?
So in regards to the overall construction phasing, phase one, Big Y will close on or about June 22nd, and we'll start the abatement within the existing building on or about February 1st. And that phase will last to approximately September 1st, and that will include the demolition of the existing Big Y building and some of the other associated spaces. And we will be providing them with a dirt pad with utilities stubbed to the dirt pad. And then the phase 2 will be the Big Y building back their existing supermarket, and us building out the liquor store space for the liquor store, the Bay State Wine and Spirits tenant that's there. And then Big Y will be reopening on or about June 22nd of 2022. That's kind of how we see the phasing of it going. Actually, the Big Y build out will be phase 3, and the February to September phase I described would be phase 2, and then phase 1 will happen this fall into that February of 2021 date, which would be the utility relocation. So actually, I had the phase a little mixed up there. So phase 1 will be the utility relos. Phase 2 will be the knockdown of the building, and then phase 3 will be Big Y building back the supermarket. So those are the different phases there, and that's kind of how we see everything going down.
Thanks. Want to run through, I don't see Charles on the phone either. Looks like he might have dropped or so forth. So just a couple of other quick items. This is an outline of generally how the area would be repaved. It's going to be done in approximately 4 phases. Not necessarily back to back to back, but we will be phased with construction as appropriate. We want to show this to the board to give them a general idea that the commitment that was made to repave the entire center is there, and then just generally how it's going to be phased. And then one of the other ones is this is a sample of the construction phasing relative to traffic circulation. The whole project's going to be broke down into a bunch of micro segments within those overall phases that Casey just identified. And this is just an example of how there'll be a staging area and some work being done up front at the store, and then also some of the stormwater improvements in the area here. How these areas will be cordoned off with fencing, and then parking and access will be rerouted around those areas. And this will be done in various different ways through different stages of construction. But this is just one example that we want to show the board based upon some discussion that was from one of the abutters attorneys at one of the tenant's attorneys at the last meeting. Casey, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything in addition to what I just said on these 2 items.
No, I think you pretty much covered it, Nathan. Yeah.
All right. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Phil if he has anything else he'd like to add, or otherwise we can open it up for questions or comments.
This is Charles. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. I had a lot of difficulties here, but if I can just take another moment of the board's time, I just wanted to note a couple things on these plans that we had prepared. The intent here is to limit the work areas once we get into phase 3 in particular, so as to minimize interference and any impediment that the public would have to gain access to the stores that remain open. You can see in the first phase here, the bulk of the work, if you flip up to the first phase, Nate, the bulk of the work is confined to the back area of the building. That's because we're bringing in new utilities and getting ready for phase 2, which is the demolition phase, where we would actually be tearing down the Big Y and some of the adjacent retail space. And in that phase, here again, there's very little going on in the main parking lot. There may be some selective drainage work, but again, access will be maintained at all times. Phase 3 is where the site gets very busy. Big Y will have a staging area that will be up for most of the duration of the construction. That will be taken down towards the end in the last few months so that we can finish any remaining site work in that area. That'll be the last area to be finished up. But the other 2 plans, the circulation plan, if you could flip to that, Nate, that was just meant to show that at no time are we fencing off the whole site and tearing it up. We're taking selective pieces sequentially This is just one example of that where we're working on the storm water quality work with the new structures that have to go in and some of the new piping that has to go in. We would set up fencing around the work area. We would have barricades, cones, barriers, signs, everything needed to temporarily divert traffic. But again, with the intent of limiting disruption, keeping traffic flow happening in a safe manner throughout the entire construction period. We've done this on many, many projects, and it just requires good communication, not only with our contractor, Big Y, their contractor, but also with our tenants, because we want to minimize any impact on their business and their sales. So the other plan was just a paving phasing plan to show you that we're thinking about that too. Again, the site is probably going to be broken down into at least 5 areas. Each one of these is a manageable piece that can be paved in a day or 2 once all the preparatory work is completed. And we'd probably be progressing from the back into the front lot over the course of the project. The other thing I wanted to reinforce the point that Nate made, we have been engaged in conversation with our butters who expressed concerns. Those conversations have been going on now for some time. We've actually met with them 4 times. We've concluded one agreement, and we have a couple of others that are in final form that we believe will be concluded and signed over the next couple of days. So I turn it back over to Patrick.
All right. Phil, do you have anything else to add, Mr. Mackey?
No, I'm the one normally stealing other folks' thunder, but I think Nate and Charles have amply covered everything I have would have said anyways.
All right.
Excuse me,
Board
Charles.
have any questions?
This is Al Poro. You said you've got agreements with some abutters. Does that agreement include the gentleman at 34 Davis Avenue, Mr. Cochran?
Yes, that's the one now that we actually have fully executed, signed by both parties. And we're very close with the others. We came back to them with a plan, a detail showing what we were proposing to do to mitigate their concerns, and expect to have those signed over the course of the next few days.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
I have a
Sheehan.
question. There is another abutter. I took a walk down. I was down that area, and I spoke with the gentleman across from Mr. Corkran, across the driveway. He was concerned about, one thing was the hours, but also the hours that the trucks are coming through. And he said sometimes they were there at 5 in the morning. He's made complaints with the police and so on and so forth. But his other problem was that his fence, you could see his fence was damaged by the trucks coming in and out. And I just was wondering where you are with that gentleman. Did you also speak with him as far as, his concerns?
Yes, that's Mr. Hebner. In fact, a property manager and KCR construction manager were speaking with him again today. We're actually doing repair of that fence today as well as some gutter and leader work on the back of the Planet Fitness and Dollar Tree to try to address some of the issues with ponding water back there when we get a heavy rain. So we're well aware of the concern there with the fence, and we're addressing it. We're also taking out a row of trees along that access drive, which was his main request.
Just to follow up, Is there a problem? There obviously is a problem with the trucks trying to fit through there. Is there any widening of that area where they make the turn, or is there any improvement, or are they just going to whack his fence again?
No, so on the agreement with Mr. Corkman, one of the things we're doing is plan shows a new asphalt apron in the area of the plan that Nate is circling. So where that access drive meets Davis Avenue is the problem because there's a sharp turn there. So the proposal and what we've agreed to do is to put a radius there to take out a tree and modify the fence in that area to make that turn very maneuverable for any of the trailers that are coming in and out of there.
Thank you.
Any other members have any comments at this time? Mr. Patrikowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question from the gentleman from Bowler Engineering, and just more of a comment. I did not, shame on me, I didn't realize that the storm water now, correct me if I'm wrong, flows directly into the brook. And I was reading on one of your memos on a response to a question about you're going to put in stormwater treatment and things like that before the water gets discharged into the brook. I guess my question is, I see that Mark Ryan is fine with it. Does Conservation Commission have to weigh in on that at all with discharging into the brook? And maybe just give a Reader's Digest version of how that stormwater is handled before it enters the brook. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. So you're essentially correct in what you stated there. Currently, the site just sheet flows off into the brook. And what we're doing is in this location here, and this location here, we're adding 2 water quality treatment units, which are subsurface units that will capture and treat 1 inch of water quality volume in accordance with requests of the conservation or former conservation agent Al Getz. These 2 curb breaks here, where the sheet flow currently went off directly into the brook, have been slightly modified, and new inlets have been put there to capture the water and direct it through the treatment unit prior to discharge into the brook. You are also correct that conservation will have a complete review of this as part of the notice of intent process when we go through that process, which we are intending to file shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I had asked Al Getz, the retired conservation agent, to review the project. He did review the project and provided some comments. I forwarded those comments to the applicant, and they, I believe, have responded to all of Al's concerns. As Nathan just indicated, they will be filing with the Conservation Commission, and the commission will be reviewing the stormwater management system and the project as well.
Thank you, Paul. Any other member have any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Rob Bamber.
Hi, Rob.
Hey. I'm glad to see stormwater management going in. I'm glad to see some islands being put in. I think this project is good, but I was wondering if anyone had considered the proposal of possibly pulling back away from the brook between the bank and the area of runoff that you were just talking about a minute ago. You could basically pull it back to the 50-foot no build area line. It would be a pretty modest adjustment, in my opinion. Right now it's on top of the brook all the way down, and it has been for years. It's, and also, you know, I think if there was an area that people could go and enjoy, I think it's more of an asset to have. And for Big Y, for the town, for the realty company, I just wondering if anyone had considered that any further. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anyone care to comment on that?
So there was some consideration from that after the last meeting. You're talking about expanding it or bumping an area out to the 50-foot line, which is essentially through here, which is most of the main access aisle as it comes in. Doing additional improvements in this area affects access, circulation, and overall parking, which is, I know we're slightly overparked from zoning, but it is tight relative to requirements and needs from the store and the store's functionality standpoint. A couple of other concerns were, you know, basically putting an area of, you know, congregation near the main access aisle in and out of the store. So there would be some safety concerns there. And lastly, it is an area that is pretty remote from the store or any of the other uses on site. So we see it as an area that would be infrequently used by folks who are visiting the site. They would be more likely to be visiting, you know, entering, using the services, or visiting the retail spaces and then leaving rather than heading, you know, kind of along the brook to use any sort of that area there.
I might add,
Sorry,
I
Chairman.
might add to that. I would say also, we did give it, we had a serious discussion about it and like the idea, but our site is so tight. And as Nate pointed out, not only Big Y, but our other existing tenants have ratios in their leases where there's certain a number of parking spaces they require. We don't make those standards, they do. So we're kind of bound by the leases to have certain minimum number of spaces. And I know if if you're familiar with the Plaza and you go by there today or tomorrow, you'll say, well, there's a lot of empty parking spaces here. That's because it's a completely antiquated store, and the Plaza will be dramatically transformed. We expect there will be substantially more traffic when the Big Y opens. So, you know, as much as we'd like to, we have reduced the parking by another, I believe, 18 spaces since the original submission, and created more landscape area in a number of locations. And at this point, we feel like we're kind of at the point where we really can't sacrifice an area that would be meaningful without, you know, in turn reducing some of the other landscape areas, because we need to maintain that minimum amount of parking.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you for explaining that. Really, if you were to look at the main drag where we're entering, the only part that I'm really proposing is between the dog leg and the runoff area. So the number of spaces you'd be losing would really be under 20. And I think if possible, I mean, there really isn't that much access as far as pedestrian wise anyway. I think that might be a way to access the site, as well as a way to enjoy the river. But thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Anyone else on the board? I'll open it up to Members of the community? Anyone have any comments? State your name and your address for the record, please, Mr. Iasko.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Hi, sorry about that. I'm new to this. My name is John Louise. I live at 46 Davis Ave, which is basically the last house that abuts the property. I'm basically behind the dollar store, the gym, and then kind of like the side end of Big Y. And as far as the water goes, listening to the last meeting and up to date now, I've figured out that they've owned the property. They've known for 10 years that water has been going not only through my yard, but into the river, which untreated, which isn't really a good thing for anybody. But water, like he says, people are having water problems. I'm the one with the water problems. The water comes off the wall, and I'll show videos of it, literally crashing off the wall, literally ripping out cement, busting through my yard, ripping all my flower beds and everything apart. Has been doing it for a while, even before that July storm, the storm before it, the big storm, and the one after it. I had like a river going through my yard. I had to destroy a fence because it was holding the water back so much. So that's one of my issues. The fence gets destroyed all the time. As far as the drivers go, if you approach a driver that's sleeping back there, it's pretty dangerous. You really don't want to call the cops. And then when the drivers pull down to pull in, as it is current, not only are those huge trees in the way and have been for as long as I can remember, the driver, if someone's parked in and they can't get in, oh my God, they'll beep the horn. You'll be in your house having breakfast, and all of a sudden you'll just hear someone going crazy. It's one of these drivers, and I think it's pretty dangerous, to be honest with you. They are currently addressing my fence as they were this morning, which I wasn't aware of. They were putting a new section of fence on mine. So I opened the door to let the dog out. Well, there's no fence there. The dog gets out. I mean, I appreciate him putting up the fence, which is great. But my issue is the water. I had a pool here since the beginning of spring to put in, and I can't because every time it rains, it's literally a river coming through my yard. And it came to me today to try to get a signature on a proposal of something that they may do or should do. I mean, honestly, this is something that should have been done way back when, and they knowingly have, damaged my property and, our own environment knowingly, and no punishment, nothing has come to them. And I just think that's bad because I've spoken to the woman that was prior to the gentleman, Michael, explaining the same problem. They continue to have it. I mean, I get flooded basements because of it. It's continuing ongoing. It's unsolved. And the damage that was done prior has not been addressed. That's my current situation. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're at number 46,
Yes, sir.
Davis Ave?
Yeah, right next to Falcone's house. He's got a unit that he rents, and he's got a 5-bay garage. He's the very last one on the corner of the property. As far as like the access to where the dumpsters, if you've ever been behind where the gym is.
I have.
Yeah, and one other thing to mention, I have forgotten about this. Being a person that's lived on this street, I am very old school. I've lived in Norwood. I know the Norwood rule. You're born here, you leave, but you always come back. I believe in that. I've lived on the street all my life. I feel like I know everyone, and I'm like the mayor of Davis Ave. But I've talked to everybody, and if they want parking, they could easily purchase the homes. I know some people that would sell it to them, but that's a whole nother issue. But they could put up, an 8 or 10 foot, however high fence you can get that's solid, not chain link so you can see through it. And then like abrevieties or a tree that will grow high to block the building, as well as provide oxygen for us, because those diesel trucks, it's vicious when you walk outside and you smell diesel. And if they just run, the drivers never shut the trucks off ever. It's 5 o'clock in the morning or, 5, whatever. The trucks are running. So the trees would provide oxygen for us, and a hard fence that, like a solid fence would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Yosko, did you have something you wanted to add, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve Iasko, 14 Endicott Street, also town meeting member, District 5. I was more concerned about the Brook Side from the Plaza, and I was hoping that something was going to happen. I know the town, we have conservation land on the other side, opposite side of the plaza, that borders Endicott Street as well. But the town has already done a nice job cutting down dead trees and brush away from the brook, from where the underpass is there. But the main concern I have is the protection of the brook from the plaza side. That side there has been totally trashed. There's a lot of dead trees over there. There's a lot of trash. There's been screening that's been like welded or placed on the underside of the guardrail. But all of that has, during the winter, a lot of it comes down, and a lot of debris that's in the parking lot ends up blowing out there on that side of the slope going down to the brook. So I don't know what the plans are, but I even think if that got cleaned up, I'm suggesting that even arborvitae on the other side of the guardrail going down to the brook might help to protect the brook from further trash going in between all the trees down there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else want to add? Mr. Corkman, are you satisfied?
Yes, Mr. Poro, I have spoken with Casey and Mr. Ananabar from Big Y. We worked out a basic agreement of what they're going to do. We still have some operational issues that we have to work on in the future, and Mr. Louisa touched on a couple of those. One of them is, and they're all operational errors that can be fixed, but it's going to take time. And I just hope that we'll have support of town of Norwood through the planning board, that we have some sort of a reporting mechanism by which we can report back to let people know that, hey, you know, everything's going good, or hey, you know, we still have trucks with refrigerator units that are going all night long. You know, those are the things that are left. Those operational errors have nothing to do with the project moving forward. Mr. Louise is working with Cedar. I think my next door neighbors, the Hebners, are working with them. And I think that we're going down the right path. And I think this is good for Norwood. I think that we definitely want to see the plaza improved. And we don't want to see it fall back into a site of disrepair that it was for the last 15 years or so, and neglect. That we have these operational errors, and we are able to make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future.
Thank you.
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Halkiotis, would you like to jump in at this time in regard to the plaza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the project team has explained, they have revised the plans and they've addressed the majority of the concerns that have been raised by the town departments that have reviewed the project. With respect to pedestrian access, I spoke with the Cedar Realty team this afternoon about that. They had added those crosswalks in between the islands at the front of the store to provide better pedestrian safety. I asked them to try to provide one clear pedestrian pathway from the sidewalk on Walpole Street to the shopping center. And it's a challenge because the abutting property is owned by the bank, and it looks and smells like it's part of the shopping center, but it's not. And the bank is apparently vacant at this time. So that's one outstanding concern that we have. Crosswalks, paint on pavement, an island here or there to maybe make that happen was an outstanding issue that we discussed this afternoon, and they made some progress with those crosswalks in front of the store. we heard tonight from some of the neighbors, and what we've heard is kind of a common theme, that there are problems in the back of the supermarket with the operation. And a lot of those problems I don't think are the fault of Cedar Realty, the owners of the property. The Big Y has trucks coming in from various vendors, and sometimes those truck drivers are not cognizant of the fact that they're in a residential neighborhood and that they should try to be quiet and behave themselves. I want to make it clear that if and when this project is approved, the planning department is not the one that is supposed to receive complaints about the operations of a shopping center. And I think we're going to need to ask the applicant to prepare a clear protocol of who the neighbors are going to call when a tractor trailer is idling for hours and causing exhaust or honking their horn or disturbing the neighborhood. They shouldn't be calling the planning department. They should be calling the owners, and we'll ask Cedar Realty to include as part of their agreements some mechanism, phone number, or procedure for these types of operational complaints to be addressed. The revisions to the plan, I think, certainly made some progress and addressed some of the concerns that the planning department had in reviewing the project. They have added some additional islands which break up the asphalt area of the parking lot. They've proposed some additional lighting and landscaping in those islands. So they have made some good progress on the plan. At this point, I don't know if there are other neighbors, abutters that would like to make comments, but we seem to be getting to a point where the board needs to decide whether you want to continue the hearing to wrap up the outstanding concerns, or whether you're ready to close the hearing and move forward with the project.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Patrikowski?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as we're going through here and listening to the neighbors, I'm obviously in favor of the project, but I'd like to, I'm not 100% sure I'm ready to vote on it tonight, because I would like to get a few of those details with some of the neighbors buttoned down, and some of the operations going forward. And just listening to some of the comments from Steve Esco and Rob Bamber, and they make a good point. And I'm reading something from the Esco's a letter, and the first question asked was, will there be a better barrier guard rail to protect the brook from parking lot debris and a few extra trash barrels? And the answer was, currently on the plan, they are only proposing that the general contractor shall review the guardrail and associated wire mesh with the developer to identify areas of disrepair. The guardrail and wire mesh shall be repaired or replaced in these identified areas. I would just ask that, you know, in the building trades, the guy who could make or break $1 million home is the guy who paints it or wallpapers it, because that's what you look at, that's what you see. And I would just ask if we could just look at that, you know, for years, that guardrail against the brook, it just catches all the trash. It blows across the parking lot, and it ends up against that guardrail, and then it's always a dump, that guardrail, and a lot of it ends up down the bank or into the brook. So if we could just look at maybe a better way on that guardrail, I don't know, a better fence or a better, just maybe just take a look at that. And as far as the trucks parking in the back, in some of the businesses I've worked in, we've asked drivers, I don't know what time they unload. Maybe they unload these trucks all night. I guess this is a question of a big why. But, you know, you have a big parking lot in the front with no neighbors. You know, I would require any truck that's going to get there at 5 or 3 in the morning to be unloaded at 6, that they queue up in the parking lot. And then at, you know, 5:45 in the morning, they drive around the back and get unloaded. But if they're gonna park have any overnight parking or something to queue up in the parking lot, there'll be no one there, and it's a huge, and you won't disturb the neighbors. So just a couple of comments. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
It's currently 7 to 7. They cannot be in there before 7 a.m. And that's a noise ordinance in the town of Norwood, and that is steadfast, and there's going to be no alteration of that.
And this is John again. And they currently have signs there that are very small. No one reads them. It's not Big Y's fault. It's a subcontractor. We all know that. They hire who they hire. It is what it is. I mean, you go out there at 5 a.m. My daughter comes back. Oh, Dad, there was a guy, urinating back there. I mean, it is what it is. No one can really control that. I was just commenting on that. I have other issues, but I don't know how.
John, you're at number 46, correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry. John again at 46 Davis Ave. My issue is basically there's one sewer for the whole side of the building. If I don't go out and clean it, I know I'm going to have a river in my yard. I mean, when it does come in, it takes all the sand, 3 inches of sand in your yard. If anyone's ever raked your yard or used a lawnmower, you know what that means. It's hard to rake. It's with glass and trash. It's ridiculous. We've been complaining for a long time. And it seems just recently, because of this project, that they've responded to all of our wants and needs, because of their plans. I mean, I go back there and clean the trash. There's a space between my fence where all the water pushes. I mean, it took 4 things of lumber that had all our support for the flower bed. It took it and just blew it out. I mean, I have a video that my daughter noticed. There's a gas can floating by. That's how much the water was pushing. I mean, we found a turtle the other day in my yard. I mean, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying it is what it is. The water coming through has damaged arborvitae trees that I've had for 15 years. Anyone that knows them knows they're quite expensive. I mean, the gas can video, I just couldn't believe that she noticed that. I appreciate the support from the town a lot. It's very nice to hear that. I don't know electronics at all. I'm sorry. I would have, made my concerns earlier, but I really don't know how this works. So I apologize for that, but I really do appreciate the town's support with the neighbors, because we're really not asking for much. We haven't really asked for much. Like I said, I have spoken to everyone that abuts this building, so I know everyone's wants and concerns. They'd really like a white fence or some type of fencing that's solid. I say a plastic one, but it is what it is. 8 or 10 feet high, just for visual. Arborvitaes, and on a regular maintenance crew that comes, because literally for 2 years, I haven't seen a landscaper come back there and clean it. And the trash is absolutely ridiculous. It is what it is, but we have to end up cleaning it. So a crew that maybe not that we control, but that we can mention to them, hey, come over here and do this, picking up the sticks and just doing the regular maintenance, because that doesn't happen at all, as someone had mentioned earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles? Are you there?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to ask the project engineer to address John's drainage concerns, whether or not he was aware that stormwater was leaving the site, channelizing, causing erosion, or whether this is something new. And either way, I think we need to ask the project engineer to look at the stormwater management design and make sure that it will keep all of the stormwater where it's supposed to go, not flooding neighboring properties.
That's why I was looking for Charles, isn't he the engineer?
Nate, could we have a moment to comment on that, because we have addressed all this on the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a newer item. It was not known on the initial submission to the board, but based upon discussions with the abutter and the developer, that situation which occurs at the back in the abutting property in this location here was made known. So what we're looking at doing is the back downspouts and gutters on the back of the Dollar Tree and Planet Fitness are in relative disrepair. Those will be replaced and piped into a new underground header pipe that will connect directly into the proposed drain line that goes out and discharges out to the brook. That'll take a lot of water that's coming off the roof and hitting the pavement and trying to go into a catch basin that's just off the corner of the building here, and it'll pipe it directly away from it. So this low point here with the catch basin will really just need to deal with the small amount of pavement that's there. That catch basin is being replaced and lowered so that the water will better flow into the inlet. And then the entirety of the curbing, which abuts the neighbors in the back here, is relatively low from wear and tear over the years. It's only a couple inches high. So that curb will be replaced in its entirety with a new 6-inch reveal curb to help contain any flows and storm water on the site. So that's what we're looking at doing for improvements in this back area here. I think the biggest improvement is getting that water that's coming from the roof and onto the pavement away from that area in its entirety and just putting it right into the pipe and getting it back out. I think that will provide a great improvement, and this will help, or this will address the issue that's back there.
Thank you, Nate.
Al,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have a comment in the from John Cochran. I believe he wishes to speak.
go ahead, Mr. Cochran.
I already spoke. I just wanted to make sure that that it's known that that it's 7 to 7, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Are the deliveries only. No lining trucks up behind the store, no preloading, none of that. 7 a.m. is 7 a.m. It's not 5:45. It's not 6:45. That's the only other issue that I'd like to make. And I think it was Ernie that mentioned that it was the trucks would go over there at 5:45, line up and go over at 5:45, because that's what the problem is. They're out there idling first thing in the morning, making noise. That's what we're trying to prevent. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to clarify where the entrance off Davis Street is. Is there only one entrance there, or are there two? And if there's, which houses does it go between? I'm just a little, it's a little tough to read here. It looks like there's another access further down, but who are the neighbors? Mr. Cochran, I take it, is one?
Yes, and Regine is the other one. It's a horseshoe, basically. It goes next to John Cochran's house and Mr. Hebner's house. Between there, there's like an alley. And then they come out and they have access to the back of the stores, and they're supposed to flow from right to left behind the building and then come up further, like I said, on the horseshoe, and then exit out that way. And there is signage there. I mean, Big Y and everyone has done what they're supposed to do. As we all know, these are subcontractors and they're going to do what they do regardless of the signs. You know what I mean? Thank you.
Okay, because I did speak to someone there, and I just want to make sure that butters on both sides have been, notified and they talk about having an agreement. I just want to make sure the right folks have you've spoken to, and that they do you do have an agreement with them. So that would be Mr. Cochran and Regina Pasquantonio.
I believe that's her last name. Yes, that is a duplex next to John. Regina is the outside one facing the driveway, and the other woman, excuse me, I don't have her name. She's on the right side next to John.
So
townhouse.
I zoomed in on the plan here on what's being shared. So there's the drive here next to Mr. Corkran, and there's that horseshoe loop that comes around, and this is the Regina Pasquantonio property here.
Okay.
Those are the two that are in between the horseshoe shaped access.
I think the gentleman I spoke to might have been Mr. Marahamo.
Yeah, he would
On
be
the other side of the horseshoe, and I just want to make sure is he someone you spoke with also, and you may have an agreement with? I believe he was the gentleman that had the problem with his fence also, and also with the timing of the trucks.
I don't, this is Charles from Cedar Realty. I don't believe we've spoken to that gentleman. I wasn't aware of a conversation with him, at least. Although Mike Amenabar, our property manager, may have spoken to him.
I think that might be a good thing to do. He's the gentleman, I believe, that told me that he had a problem with his fence, where the trucks ran into it, and it was the top part of the fence, you could see it was bent off.
Right. We will engage in conversation with him right away.
Thank you.
I wasn't aware of any concerns there.
Anyone else at this time?
If I could, just so we're all clear, before this gentleman, Mike from Cedar Realty, there was another woman. I don't have my notes in front of me. They were aware of the water issue back at least 7 years ago. So just so everyone's aware that it's not something new to them. They were aware, or at least the people before they're aware that we had the problem. And my biggest issue is right now, I don't know if it's going to rain tomorrow and I have to clean my yard. It's the summer of 2020 with Corona. I have a 16-year-old daughter. So I set up a pool and invite her friends because she has had some, social issues, and this doesn't help it. So I try to set up a pool, and if it doesn't rain real hard, we can keep it, or does it get damaged? I just don't know. What do I do? All these plans are great, but if it rains tomorrow on my yard, I mean, I don't have much, but it's my yard. What do I do? All this is great, but summer will be over by then. The pool's been sitting there since spring. What do I do? Sorry.
John, unfortunately, John, it's one of those things right now that we can't correct it overnight tonight. But I believe, I see that these gentlemen are willing to work and they're willing to get this thing resolved. And that's the best that I think we can hope for tonight. We're not going to, I agree with Mr. Patrikowski. I can see continuing this meeting rather than looking for a vote to close it. I will at this time look for a motion to continue the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, so moved.
Yes, Mr. Sheehan.
I would like to
And
move
I have
that
a second.
Second.
Pat, when is the next scheduled meeting? The board needs to vote to continue the hearing to a time and date certain. When's our next regular scheduled meeting?
I believe it's August 24th.
I'll amend that motion to say August 24th. What time would be convenient?
7:10.
At 7:10 p.m.
And a second on that? Ernie?
Second.
Okay. On the roll call, Mr. Sheehan,
Aye.
Mr. Patrikowski,
Aye.
Mr. Hatchie,
Aye.
Mr. Murphy, Mr. Bamber.
Aye.
The chairman says aye. 5-0 on the continuation of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, between now and then, we'll continue to work with the applicant on the outstanding issues. We're going to take another final look at the revised plan, and I'll come up with some draft conditions to take a look at. I'm thinking that we're going to need some conditions related to having the applicant submit a clear protocol of who people call when there are violations to the 7 to 7 delivery times, and violations to the and issues that affect the neighborhood residents from the trucks doing deliveries. I also want to have Mark Ryan, our town engineer, take a look at Nathan's fix for the back of the buildings to reduce Mr. Louise's flooding. I'd like the town engineer's eyes on that and get his opinion whether or not he thinks that's all sufficient. And I'm thinking with situations like this, I've had something like this in the past where we think that the engineers have something fixed. But I think that having a condition that would require in 1 year, we revisit the stormwater issue with Mr. Louise's property and hear back from him that everything's okay, or if there is still some corrective action needed, that the applicant would agree to take that on after a 1 year assessment of the performance of the measures to improve the stormwater management system causing flooding in the neighboring properties.
Thank you, Paul. Brian?
I'm sorry.
I thought you were trying to say,
Nope, I didn't say anything.
okay. Very good.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I just have a question. I guess this is, I don't recall ever putting anything in about maintenance. I know that some of the concerns were, you know, the trash blowing around and so on and so forth. And I guess my question is to Paul also is, have we ever had any conditions where we put on that would address the issue of, you know, trash and maintenance and of the property? Obviously, if you've got all that trash blowing around up against the brook, you know, that's something that's inconvenient to folks, but I don't know if that's in our purview or not. If it is, I would certainly like to see that issue taken care of, but I don't know if it's something we can do.
I think that we will probably propose a condition that will require that the property be policed for litter, you know, at least once a week. It's kind of too bad that government has to tell people that they should do things that they should know what to do already. But if this has been an ongoing problem that we've heard from multiple neighbors, apparently we need to make a condition to address it, and we can do that.
Thank you, Paul.
So this public hearing will be continued until the 24th of August at 7:10 p.m. You can check the town's website for the planning board's agenda, which will contain a link for you to join a go-to-meeting invite to attend the next hearing. I want to thank those residents and the project team for joining us tonight. We're going to move on to our next agenda item. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Our second agenda item with Continental Development regarding the Forbes Hill redevelopment plans has been canceled at the request of the folks from Continental. And so the next agenda item that the board is going to entertain is going to be a meeting with Mark Ryan, Town Engineer, DPW Director, and David DeLuca, Town Council. The board is going to be asked to vote to go into executive section because we will be discussing a matter that could involve litigation, and that is a matter involving the intersection of Planning Field, Brook Road, and Upland Road. Our next agenda item is an executive session, and we're going to ask those folks that are tuned into the meeting that are not on the planning board or not Mr. DeLuca or Mr. Ryan to please tune out. The board will then resume in regular session following that agenda item.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Steve?
Yep.
Fiasco, you want to sign out, please?
Yes, yes, sir.
Mr. Algiotis.
Yep.
Just a question. So we do have a meeting after executive session. Should I give Mr. Hearn an estimate of when to come back?
Yeah, I talked to Mr. Hearn today and I told him it would probably be about 8:45.
Okay.
He's aware that we've adjusted the agenda.
All right.
And we have a request before us for Mr. Hal Kyotis, town planner, to compose a letter to Campanelli Companies for their default on the original agreement. And if I can get a vote, an emotion first from the members of the board for the vote, Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, so moved.
And second,
Second.
and Mr. Patrikowski second. Okay, on a roll vote, Mr. Sheehan,
Aye.
Mr. Patrikowski,
Aye.
Mr. Bamber,
Aye.
Mr. Hatchie,
Aye.
Chairman Poro, aye. The 5-0 vote on a motion to have the town planner execute a letter to the Campanelli Companies. Thank you.
And to clarify, the purpose of the letter is to notify them that they've defaulted on special permit conditions to install a traffic signal at the intersection of Planning Fields Road and Upland Road. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item in the agenda. Patrick, what do we got?
Okay, so this is an informal discussion with Attorney Hearn regarding a proposal in the mixed-use overlay district.
Good evening, Counselor.
Good evening, Mr. Porro and members of the board. David Hearn of 470 Washington Street here in Norwood, an attorney. This evening I'm representing Mr. Derek Fitzgerald, who's also joined the meeting. Mr. Fitzgerald, you may remember, is one of the developers of the ongoing condominium project over at the former St. Catherine's Convent property. And what brings us before you this evening is a request to have a discussion regarding the mixed-use overlay district and some of the provisions of that section of the zoning bylaw, and some of the issues that Mr. Fitzgerald and I see as developing in terms of how the MUOD works or is likely to work. Just to give you a little background, Mr. Fitzgerald has been a developer of different types of properties, including residential properties, for a number of years. The Convent project, I think, is his first project in Norwood. Derek, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's had experience in other municipalities over the years. He is engaged in discussions with the owners of a couple of properties in our downtown central business district, properties that would be within the MUOD overlay district, regarding purchasing those and developing them or redeveloping them for residential purposes. You recall, no doubt, that when the MUOD was proposed, one of the driving factors of it, as I understood it, and I think others will agree, was that we wanted to try to revitalize the downtown and by encouraging development, particularly of housing that would bring people to the downtown, not just visiting, living there, and making use of the stores and other businesses that are there, the restaurants, and bringing life to it. The MUOD is a way of allowing for some additional development over what would normally be allowed under the zoning bylaw, in return for which developers are expected to provide certain public benefits. Whether the benefits are financial so that the town can make improvements on its own, or are physical, such as certain amenities, certain pocket parks and things like that have been discussed. The MUOD carries with it certain design standards that have to be met, and those are all designed to enhance the final product. So somebody owning property downtown or somebody buying property downtown has the option of going under the current bylaw, the original bylaw, or opting for the, to go under the mixed-use overlay district provisions, which would allow for greater density, but also give something back to the town in terms of design control, in terms of public amenities. The situation that we find ourselves in, and I think from discussions with the planning department and discussions my client has had with others similarly situated, developers or property owners in the downtown, is that as written, the MUOD provisions, while they're a great improvement on as far as density goes, over the original bylaw provisions, which are still available if somebody wants to go that route. The density allowances under the MUOD are probably not going to work very well for most development projects or redevelopment projects, in that the cost, and this is what Mr. Fitzgerald is finding, the cost of land, the cost of site work, the cost of construction will make a project not even not profitable, but just not doable with the limitations we have. Right now, we're looking at a piece of property, a couple of pieces of property that would be about half an acre in size. Under the present bylaw, the original bylaw, you could get 7 or 8 residential units there. Under the MUOD, for half an acre, you might be able to get, by special permit, not as a matter of right, but by special permit from this board, maybe 15 or so units, maybe 16. The problem is that the cost of acquiring and building isn't going to, it's not going to work with that limitation of say 15 units or so. And I think the maximum that you allow as a matter of course under the MUOD would be 32 units per acre. Mr. Fitzgerald can tell you much more about this than I can, but in our discussions, he has made clear to me that you take the cost, what you look for in terms of the average cost to buy land, or what a per unit, and you need to get several more units, many more units, to make these projects work. And I think that some of you may have heard this already from other property owners or potential developers in the downtown. The MUOD is a great idea, but I think that we're not seeing people beating the door down trying to apply for projects under the MUOD rules, because people are coming to the conclusion that there just isn't enough in it for people to take the risk and to spend the money in order to make projects work that will bring people to the downtown and help revitalize the downtown. So that's really the situation that brings us to this discussion. And I had talked with Mr. Halkiotis about it, and he said, well, you know, perhaps you could come in and talk to the board about it. Now, the board has leeway under the mixed-use overlay district rules to vary what can be done. You've got, by special permit, you can, under the MUOD, vary any of the provisions and any of the requirements under the bylaw, under that section of the bylaw. You can authorize, and I'm quoting now, a deviation from any of the requirements set forth in section 9.4, provided that one or more of the eligible public benefit improvements listed in subsection 12B, 12.2B have been provided. So you have some leeway, you have the authority. And one of the things that we wanted to discuss with you tonight was what the board thinks about that, whether the board is open to giving leeway with respect to density and other requirements in order to see projects come downtown. Because without it, I'm not sure you're going to see too many projects come downtown, particularly in the already developed areas. The owners want a lot of money for property that they think is very valuable. The cost of building is high. And it doesn't make sense for a lot of developers if we're limited to the requirements that are set forth in the MUOD language. I don't know, Derek, am I covering what we've talked about? Or maybe if you want to add anything, certainly you can.
Yeah, I think you definitely touched all the bases there, David. As David explained, these two parcels, we like the property. We decided to make an offer. They had a number in mind, what they want, and for us to develop on that site makes it extremely difficult to make the numbers work. And I think I've run into that in a few occasions in downtown Norwood. I have developed in other towns where there was a little bit more density, but we did develop on similar sites outside of Norwood. But so we're here tonight, Mr. Hearn and I, just to see if there's any flexibility or what are our options going forward. And are we going to run into this problem again in the future?
And I think, Mr. Chairman, we're not asking the board to say in this type of discussion, oh, sure, we'll give you all kinds of relief or anything like that. We haven't seen anything proposed yet. But we're trying to get a sense of whether the board is, what the board's thinking is, or whether the board is open to allowing greater density than under appropriate circumstances. Greater density when a good project comes along that would benefit the downtown area and benefit the town generally. So Mr. Halkiotis said, come on in, have a discussion. Here we are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Hearn. Yes.
We've been getting some background noise and we've kind of narrowed down the likely suspects to Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald, could you please mute yourself unless you're ready to speak?
Sure.
Thank you. Unfortunately, this is a conversation that I've had several times with other property owners or prospective developers in the downtown. It's been a year since the board, since town meeting voted to adopt the mixed-use overlay district. And we were really hoping to see some positive changes from the bylaw. But I can tell you that I've been approached by half a dozen local businessmen, property owners, developers, prospective developers, and they basically told me what David Hearn just explained, that they've tried to look at the numbers and it just doesn't really work. My reaction to those people were that the bylaw is new and it's only been a year, and I thought it would be premature to try to go back to town meeting and ask them to increase the density at this point in time. But I don't know what we should do, but I do want to acknowledge that this is the 5th or 6th time that I've heard this already. And I've explained to people that we thought we had pushed the envelope for density about as high as we could in order to get the 2/3 town meeting vote. And so this is a problem that I think is in the background. And sooner or later, I think if we want to see some redevelopment projects in the downtown, we're probably going to need to address this.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Hearn, has your client done a comparison of what the existing requirements are for setbacks and whatever in density that he would propose? What would be something reasonable that would make the project work for him?
Well, I've done a comparison of what the existing bylaw, the old version provides, what would be allowed under the MUOD. But even with the MUOD, at maximum development of, say, 16 units for half an acre, it doesn't work. So we would need, I don't know, Derek, you'll have to unmute in terms of what number you think, but we'd need, I'm not.
We'd need
not
double
necessarily
that.
double,
Well, close to
double,
it.
okay. Close to double what is allowed under the bylaw. And, you know, and going back to what Mr. Halkiotis.
Existing bylaw.
Yeah, I'm sorry? I
Under
didn't
the
hear that,
existing
Al.
bylaw or under the MUOD?
Double really what the MUOD allows. It's just the cost of land, the cost of construction doesn't work unless you can get a sufficient number of units, dwelling units onto a property. Now, Mr. Halkiotis said, you know, it may be premature to go back to town meeting because it was something that, you know, a lot of work went into it, and I appreciate that. I know what was going on. I had discussions with Mr. Halkiotis while it was going on, but the town meeting did give you the authority to allow for deviations from the standards already set forth in the bylaw. So I think you do have some authority, and I'm not asking you tonight, I couldn't ask you tonight, and I wouldn't, to say, oh yeah, we'll give you a number. But we're looking to have this discussion about whether you're even open to considering allowing more units than the black letter set forth in the MUOD language. That's what we're looking for, Mr. Porro.
Thank you. Mr. Patrikowski, did you have something you want to inject?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm probably one of the few people in Norwood that think that apartments in the right place done correctly is still okay. The only thing, Mr. Hearn, on you saying on the leeway of the board, I think really the leeway there is if we allow 16 units and you want to get to 17, you know, we may have some leeway there, but to get to 32 that's a big piece of rope. I don't think we can do that, you know, as a board to do that, and I wouldn't feel right doing that to the town without going back to the town. Yeah, I am open for more density downtown. I think it you know, it works when you look at what Olivati's has for density and what the Talbot building has for density. It's one of them, I think, was in the 80s. And granted, they're small and stuff, but I don't think people realize the only other issue you have though there is you have a height requirement. If you're on Washington Street, you have to have a step back. And you know, how many units can you legitimately, you know, with those barriers, if you want to add another 10 units to 16, I mean, you're going to have to go up higher, probably. So we've added the density and we've changed our height requirements. Or, so I mean, I am open to it. I think that more density is fine. I don't have an issue with it. It may be a hard sell at town meeting. So leeway is 1 or 2. I don't think doubling it is leeway.
Thank you, Mr. Patrikowski.
Mr. Porro.
Mr. Sheehan?
I'm sorry, who's up?
I had asked if Mr. Sheehan had anything to add.
Oh, okay, sorry, Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Hatchie, anything you'd like to add?
I think Mr. Patrikowski summarized what I would say quite well. Density is not in and of itself a concern, but the intent of this overlay district was to revitalize the downtown and create some walkable, livable space, and I think it's very case specific. So I'd be very interested to see what proposals would come forward. But as far as minor flexibility along the lines of what Ernie suggested, I wouldn't be averse to that.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan?
I agree. I could see going up maybe up to 20 at most, but depending what the project was. But we had to fight to get those height restrictions where they are. And I guess we'd have to see what the project looks like, but I can't see doubling it. I don't think it, as Ernie said, that we really would have that leeway. I think that any leeway we had would be minor, a few extra units, not doubling.
Thank you. Mr. Bamber?
I do know that the residents of Norwood hate the word density and increases in density. But I think looking at it so that it actually works for a developer or for the downtown, for all this to actually work, if the numbers don't add up, then what's the use of the whole district? So I'm open to it, but I'm kind of going with Joe here, where I don't see walking away and doubling it, and you can't take it back. I mean, I guess you could, but I wouldn't want to give them everything right off the bat.
I think, Mr. Chairman, one last comment on something that Rob had just touched on, and the density, and as far as density, people are scared of the word and all that. I think people really look at the building and they want to see what it looks like from the outside. And if it's a nice looking building and it fits in and it's done neatly and correct, if you have 2 units or 200 units inside that building, I don't think it really matters. I think it's the aesthetics of the building, how it looks. I look at the Regal Press and what they did down there. And, the building still looks good. It looks the same. It's compatible. It looks great. And there are a lot of units in there. I forget how many, Paul, you can tell me how many units are in Regal Press. But, I think you got to look at each project and look at what it's going to entail. So if you come to us and say, well, I want to put 2 more stories on, well, then that's we have to talk about that, but I think we have to see the project. But I think as a board, I think we're probably open to looking at density and doing something.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just want to clarify with Attorney Hearn. So, Attorney Hearn, were you talking about the special permit design waiver 9416 in terms of what gives the planning board the ability to make a waive to any design regulations?
Well, the planning board can authorize a deviation from any of the requirements set forth in section 9.4.
Yeah.
I don't think it's limited to one type of deviation or one type of requirement.
Okay.
We can discuss that. I mean, if you're saying it's limited to design, but the idea is the board's been given some authority here, and I understand reticence on the part of board members to just, nobody is asking you to say, oh yeah, let's just go ahead and allow anything we want. But, and I appreciate Mr. Patrikowski's comments a moment ago that, a lot of it, of the consideration would be, well, how does something look? How does it fit in? And I don't know that we need a lot of relief from dimensional requirements without really designing it. It's getting a sense of, is the board open to greater density than is presently in there? And I don't think you're limited by this, by the language. But again, Mr. Duchesne may have a different view, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I was just pointing out that in 9416 with the special permit for design waiver, that is for any of the requirements of zoning bylaw 9.4 of the mixed use overlay district. And within there, subsection 3, there's review criteria that the planning board could look at when reviewing any sort of deviations from a proposed project. So I guess that's one thing to factor in with this request.
Mr. Hearn, your client, those 2 parcels, are they contiguous?
They are.
Thank you.
They are.
Well, my 2 cents on the situation is I'm not afraid to make some minor modifications, but anything over 10 or 15%, I really wouldn't consider making it this time, mainly because getting the 2/3 vote that we did from town meeting sends the message of what the taxpayers want. So I just want to throw that in there.
Thank you, Mr. Porro.
Anyone else?
Derek, do you have anything at this point? And I don't want to put you on the spot. And if you
Say
don't,
again?
that's fine. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Porro, it's Mr. Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I heard everything very clearly. The situation we have is that these people that own the property, that are selling the property, the numbers don't work. And that's it, until something changes.
Yep. And that's it. You know the constraints in place, and hey, a little wiggle room still doesn't work, then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Kind of walk away.
Mr. Chairman, I think the remedy in that case, depending upon what the board might be willing to do and whether you have limitations in mind or whether you take it on a case-by-case basis, depending upon design and utility, and keeping in mind the whole point of the MUOD was to help revitalize the downtown. The alternative might be go back to town meeting sometime next year. I don't think it's going to happen this year, next year, but all of that delays revitalization. And I know there was mention of the Talbot block and Olivati. Some of these existing, what my client is proposing and would bring would be modern, up-to-date, code compliant, and very desirable types of units that would attract people to the downtown who want to live there, whether they're empty nesters or people just starting out, and would contribute to the life of the downtown by their presence, by their expenditures, by their participation. So that's what we're trying to do. And I appreciate the board's view that, it's written a particular way. It's somewhat of a hard sell to get things through town meeting when it comes to zoning matters. And I'm not asking you to throw out the whole thing and just rewrite it yourselves, but I'm asking you to be open to the idea that you have some leeway. You could vary things based upon the benefit to the community, the benefit to the downtown, the benefit to the town as an entity. So that's what, we're asking for. And, the message that Mr. Fitzgerald, I think, is giving you is that these projects probably aren't going to happen under the MUOD because of the economics. As much as we'd all like them to happen, I don't know that they're going to happen, at least to the extent that we'd like them to help revitalize the downtown. I think that's Mr. Fitzgerald, as an experienced developer, is telling you that. So, we may have to go back and talk to the sellers, and they're interested in the substance of this discussion, and we'll report back to them. Some of what you said heartens me. Some of what you said probably doesn't. It disheartens me maybe in some respects, but it's given us some food for thought, and I hope we're giving you folks some food for thought on how this may or may not work for the town. And that's not a criticism of what was done, because I know the amount of work that went into it. It's just when people look at the economics of these things, they're finding now that it isn't necessarily going to solve all the problems right now. So, we'll have to go back and we'll talk about it. But I do appreciate the time and the comments of the board this evening. And I don't want to cut anybody off. I know Mr. Patrikowski may be raising his hand or not.
I am.
Thank you.
Mr. Patrikowski.
Yeah, just a final comment, and like I said before, I'm not opposed to raising the density. It's probably the right thing to do in the mixed overlay district. We picked a number. when we did the numbers there that we thought would work, that we thought that would be people in the town would understand and may not be working. It may be, as Mr. Fitzgerald said, we heard from him and other developers that it doesn't work. But to your point of the board's leeway, again, I would feel personally to take any project and increase the density by 50 or 60%. As a planning board decision, because we feel it's good for the town, and not going to town meeting for that ahead of time. I mean, I feel we would be undercutting what town meeting voted on, and I would feel much better going back to town meeting and fighting to increase it. Again, 1 or 2 units isn't the issue here, but to increase it to that kind of extent. Personally, I would just feel better going back to town meeting, fighting the good fight, stating our case why it doesn't work the way it is, than to basically disregard what town meeting said and take it as privilege of the board. So I mean, I'm open for it, but I think for large numbers to do that, I would feel better trying to resell it to town meeting. I would just feel that I wasn't, cheating the town on that.
Thank you, Mr. Patrikowski. Councilor Hearn, my initial comment was, has your client done an analysis of what double the capacity? What does that do to make it likable or workable, I should say? That's something, if you have a chance to do, have them put it together. We'll take a look at it, because we will talk about this at a further, as part of our future meetings, as just an item on the agenda, not to bring it up for whatever other than discussion. So I'm happy to take a look at something that your client is putting together and see why
Mr.
this
Porro,
grossly doesn't.
I just want to be sure I understand, and Mr. Fitzgerald understands what it is that you're asking. Are you asking us to give you some idea of what we think the appropriate numbers or range of numbers might be in order to make these things work based upon the cost of real estate and the cost of development? I mean, we tried to tell you that a little while ago. If you do the numbers based upon what you expect
Show me some real
in this
numbers.
area. Okay.
Show me some real numbers in this area.
We can give you we'll send a memo over to Mr. Halkiotis and Mr. Duchesne with some comments on that might be helpful for you in further, in terms of further discussion. We can do that.
Thank you.
Mr.
All right.
Chairman, I just
Thanks.
have one more. I just have one more comment to add to the discussion. The foundation or the root of the problem here is that property owners believe that their property has a certain value. And if an experienced real estate developer has looked at the zoning and determined that with the increased density, a project can't go forward, when he uses the number of what the cost of the real estate is, I would suggest that some part of this problem, not all of it, would be that the property owners have unrealistic expectations on the real estate's value. Certainly, the density of the zoning could be increased, and that could solve part of the problem. But if the underlying cost of the real estate, which is the first big number in a pro forma evaluation for a development proposal, if that number is too big, it throws the rest of it off. So it's not like anybody is really pointing fingers here, but I wanted to point out that that's an important part of this component of this problem.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further?
No, I think that last comment, Mr. Chairman, is on the money. That is part of the problem. that it costs too much to get property, and maybe some of the property owners have unrealistic expectations. I'm not going to speak to any present discussions we're having, but that's a good point that Mr. Halkiotis has provided us with. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the board.
Okay, thank you, Counselor.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
We're all set? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a status report for the board if you'd like.
Okay.
I know the
Mr.
hour's getting
Fitzgerald,
late.
we're all want to step out.
I know it's getting late, so I'll try to be brief, but we've got a lot of things going on, and I wanted to explain to the board the activities Pat and I have been working on. I was off for a week, and so some stuff didn't happen when I was there, but Pat really stepped up and kept the ship on course. With respect to residential development projects, currently under construction, we have the Power Lane 3-lot subdivision, the St. Catherine condo redevelopment project, the 862 Washington Street project, and the 429 Neponset Street condominiums are all residential projects that are currently under construction. Money in the Federal CARES Act has been trickling down to the state level. The state has established a number of grant programs to provide relief to businesses and residents that are suffering the financial impacts from the pandemic. We've been working for a couple of months with a regional organization called the Southern Middlesex Opportunity Council. This is an organization that provides housing assistance to people from the bottom, folks that are homeless, to people that just need a little bit of help with affordable housing. We haven't really worked with them in the past, but under the state grant program with funding from the CARES Act to provide housing, mortgage, rental, and utility assistance, we are required to work with this organization called SMOC, Southern Middlesex Opportunity Council. We've been in discussions with them, and we're in the process of setting up a grant program for income qualified residents to seek grants of, I think, up to $5,000 to provide rental, mortgage, and utility assistance. Pat's worked on a flyer and a press release, and we're going to be kind of finalizing a contract or memorandum of understanding with SMOC to move forward with providing that relief to those folks that are struggling with housing payments. We are about to start a project that we have reported to you in the past. We had applied to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, our regional planning agency, for a technical assistance grant to look at establishing a regional housing services organization where a number of communities would join together, create a nonprofit organization and fund it. And that group would help to work on a wide variety of affordable housing related issues in the region. When we discussed this at the sub-regional level at MAPC with the Three Rivers Interlocal Council, a number of communities raised their hand and said they wanted to join in. Nord is taking the lead in this project, and we're just about to sign a scope of work to move forward on it, and we expect to get underway in September. We'll keep you posted with this project. That's with respect to economic developments. We first talked about residential activity. Regarding economic development, we are very pleased to report that the town's received $140,250,000 grant as funding from the CARES Act. This is a micro enterprise grant program. Grants up to $10,000 will be provided to those businesses, small businesses of 5 or fewer people that can demonstrate they've suffered economic hardship related to the pandemic. this $140,000 grant will be available shortly. We're working with MAPC. And the good news is that this particular grant program was joined in along with us were 22 other communities. And MAPC was able to secure the assistance of the Mass Growth Capital Council, who are going to run the grant program for us. So that will take the administration of this grant off the plate of Pat and I, and the Southside quasi-connected organization to the Commonwealth will take care of administrating that grant program. This comes right after the town just closed out a small business grant program where 16 local businesses were provided grants that had suffered economic damage from the pandemic. Those grants had a maximum amount of $5,000. Patrick Deschaines and Joe Collin ran that grant program, and it was very successful. And so if we look at these two grants combined, we really have been able to bring together a number of different ways to provide relief to our businesses, the small businesses in particular, that have been suffering since the economic crisis caused by the pandemic. I'm also pleased to report another grant that Mr. Deschaines brought into the town, $120,000 from MassDOT to create 3 parklets. These are going to be little bump outs made probably of like plexiglass material that will be established on some streets of the downtown and possibly in South Norwood. Pat really handled this particular grant application on his own, and it was a couple of weeks ago, but between a Thursday and a Friday, we looked at each other and said that we have pulled in about $250,000 in grant funds for the town to help provide relief to businesses that are suffering, and that doesn't count the grant money for housing relief. I was contacted by the facilities manager at Moderna. They are working on plans for a 55,000 square foot warehouse within the footprint of the building that they have are in the process of taking over, the old UTI building. The project is not going to involve any expansion to the footprint of the building, and all of the work is in the back of the house in the loading dock area. They're proposing to kind of fill in some low areas and repave to redo their loading dock area. In looking at the triggering thresholds for a site plan approval, it really didn't seem to hit any of those triggering thresholds. I discussed it with Matt Walsh, the building commissioner, and he and I agreed that although they are doing some work in the back of their parking lot, it doesn't trigger a site plan review. I just wanted to let the board know that that project is probably going to move forward fairly soon without a site plan review. I met with the Board of Selectmen last week. Pat and I met with them to request that they vote to approve the open space and recreation plan. You probably read in the paper, I'm pleased to report that they unanimously voted to approve the open space plan. That's one of the last steps that we need to finalize that project. We will send notice to the state that both the planning board and the Board of Selectmen voted to approve the plan. And that will hopefully bring us a final certification from the state that should be good for, I think, 7 years. In addition, that night, I also got the Board of Selectmen to vote to approve the conservation restriction for the new piece of property that the town has purchased at the end of the Saint Streets. I've been working with Dave DeLuca, Town Council, and a contact at the Wildlands Trust who is going to hold that conservation restriction. And the next step in the process is to meet with the Conservation Commission and ask them to vote to approve that conservation restriction. Once that's done, I'll need to send the letters of approval to the state, and we'll be able to finalize that conservation restriction. And that's actually the last step in the process of purchasing that property using community preservation funds. So I've been working on it since April off and on, and we're making some progress on that. This is the first conservation restriction in the town of Norwood to protect the land from future development, preserve it forever in a natural state.
Paul, what was the final cost to the town for that land?
I think we paid 260,000 for it. And the town meeting appropriation was a little bit more than that. It included $10,000 to pay for this conservation restriction to be enforced. And it included money to retain the services of a landscape architect to design a riverfront park and Riverwalk trail. We applied for a trails grant from the state to pay for the cost of the landscape architect to do the park design. It was a $30,000 grant, and unfortunately, we did not get that grant. We can't win them all. We took a shot at it. And what the game plan is next year, if we have the design already completed by a landscape architect, we'll submit that with another grant request for a trails grant and seek funding for some or all of the construction costs for the park. So we're not done with the Trails Grant program. We're going to take another shot at it next year, and there'll be a good opportunity for us to try to get some funding for construction.
Thank you.
When Al gets retired at the end of June, the general manager appointed me the acting conservation agent. And in that capacity, I have had the displeasure of having to deal with some violations. There have been two recent violations, one worse than the other. On Nichols Street, there is a temple owned by the Jain Center. And unfortunately, they took it upon themselves to clear a number of very large trees around their property. They cleared a path down to Ellis Pond, and they left 2 or 3 feet of wood chips along that pathway right up to the water's edge. I spoke to the folks at the Jain Center. They apologized. They said they had no idea that this was violating any laws, and they agreed to work with the Conservation Commission to try to bring about some kind of restitution and restoration and resolution to the problem. The wood chips leading down to the pond are actually in the swamp wetland area adjacent to the pond. It really looked pretty bad, and they felt really bad about it. I do think that it was an honest mistake, and they were not aware that they were violating any environmental laws. The second violation was at the Skating Club of Boston. When they constructed University Ave back in the 70s, they built a swale or a drainage ditch right along the edge of University Ave, and it runs along the frontage of the Skating Club of Boston's property. There was a strip of vegetation surrounding that swale that has standing water in it, and there was apparently some miscommunication with one of the skating club's contractors, and they clear cut the entire area of vegetation. Some of you may recall a lengthy discussion with a former planning board member about preserving some of those trees. I did an inspection last week, and I did see the tree stumps from several trees that were, at least 6 or 8 inches in diameter. I've contacted North Star, the consultant for the Skating Club of Boston, Dan Cavoni, and had a conversation with him about it. I've asked him not to do any more work in the area of that swale till we can determine the best course of action. I've contacted the peer review consultant that was working for the Conservation Commission to review this project on their behalf when it was in the permitting process. And I'm in the process of getting that environmental engineer on board to go out, take a look at the site, and make some recommendations. I've also asked the Skating Club of Boston to have their Tetra Tech landscape architect prepare a robust landscaping plan to provide some nice landscaping in front of their building. So right now, as you drove by that site, it was veiled by a strip of trees and underbrush surrounding this swale. If you go by today, it's wide open. sometimes problems create opportunities, and I'd like to look at this as an opportunity for the skating club to take advantage of creating some beautiful landscaping at their front door at the entrance to their property. What I really don't want to have happen, and I made this clear to the skating club, is I don't want them going in and trying to excavate out those stumps and grub that area. It's got standing water. It has some steep slopes. If they go in there and start mucking around, it's going to turn that drainage swale into a big mud puddle. So I've got them on hold. I'm trying to work on solutions to the problem. Being the acting conservation agent has taken a little bit of my time away from my work with the board. Just wanted to let you know that I've been wearing a couple hats. But the good news is we had 105 candidates for the environmental planner position, and that position was offered on Friday and accepted by Ms. Holly Jones. Holly comes to us as the current conservation administrator for the town of Uxbridge, where she's been there for 2 years. And she joins Mr. DeShanes as a graduate of Clark University with a degree in BA in geography and a master's degree in environmental science and policy. Holly's thrilled to be joining our team. We think she's going to be a good fit, and she's scheduled to start on September 1st, at which time I would gladly hand off my conservation agent hat to her, and she'll be able to take over. With this position going full time, we're confident that we're going to be able to get some things done that have been on the to-do list for a long time. And we think Holly's going to be a good addition to Team Norwood. Two other things before I'm done. As you probably are aware, the town is offering a flood assistance grant program. The manager's office took that over. I was asked to write the grant program and the application process about a month ago. I used the small business grant program as a template, and in a few hours I turned it into a flood remediation grant program. There's been a lot of interest, and I understand over 100 people have contacted the town seeking grant assistance. And I think that the town and volunteers have been going out and doing inspections to work on providing some assistance to those residents that had suffered the impacts of the flooding from the storm at the end of June. The last item, and this is a big item, also affects the June 28th storm, and that has to do with Norwood Hospital. A general manager called a meeting of several town officials at the hospital last Thursday. Pat and I attended, and we asked Ted Brovitz to join us. There was a tour of the facility. I was not able to get to the meeting for the tour portion. Pat did and described just astonishing amount of damage that he saw from the tour and from a security camera video that showed the flooding. And when I'm done, Pat can jump in and give you a little bit of detail on that. At this point in time, the hospital officials are in back and forth conversations with their insurance carrier, and the hospital officials have not decided what they're going to do. They don't know whether they can, whether they should try to rehab and restore the existing facility, or whether they should tear the whole campus down and start over again. The general manager and the chairman of the board of selectmen have asked us to prepare a zoning bylaw amendment that would establish a medical services overlay district. The current zoning general business has some serious limitations that would affect the hospital's ability to realistically rebuild at that location. There's a 30-foot height limitation, and there's a floor area ratio limitation that would limit them from being able to construct today what's on the ground now. And so with that request, and with so much going on in the planning office, and my difficulty to focus on what we need to for town meeting, meaning the Route 1 corridor study, I've asked to bring in a consultant, and we're looking at bringing in Ted Brovitz to work with us to write that bylaw amendment that would go in front of town meeting in the fall special. I've received a proposal from Ted to do that work, and I'm in the process of evaluating that. But I wanted to make sure the board was aware that this was going on. This is a big deal. It could potentially help to be a catalyst to facilitate the complete redevelopment of the hospital property and some neighboring properties adjacent to the hospital. So Ted asked us to kind of outline the boundaries of a medical services district, and Pat and I have started to work on that. This is going to be another big issue that's going to come up for the special town meeting, the future of Norwood Hospital. At that point, that's the end of my report. I would be glad to answer any questions of the board. Pat, if you want to jump in and give a little more detail on what you saw at the hospital, that might help them out.
Yeah, yeah, kind of what Paul said. So we did take a tour. Myself, Brovitz was there, and multiple town officials. I know Stewart Medical is kind of planning their own press release to kind of issue and discuss some of the damage. So I don't want to really go too much into detail, just because I think they want to be the ones to discuss the status of the hospital itself. It's just to kind of be a little bit vague on it. It will probably need extensive work to get to where it needs to be. So I kind of want to defer to. I don't want to overstep with what Stewart Medical wants to say in terms of their press release.
Hey, Pat, I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot or give anything away. Did you get the sense that the hospital wants to stay in Norwood?
Yeah.
I mean, one way or another, they either want to rebuild or remodel, but they want to stay in that location.
Yeah, I that was definitely the sense. I never got any sense that they want to go anywhere else. So
good.
Is the board amenable to having Ted Brovitz or another consultant work with us to come up with that hospital overlay district bylaw?
I'm okay with it.
Paul, I think that Ted is a good candidate for that review program for us. We're so familiar with the town as it is now that it makes sense to keep riding the same horse, if you will.
Okay, thanks.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
All right, so we may need to solicit some other proposals to be in compliance with procurement laws. But I wanted to brief you on that, and that's kind of the direction we're going in at this point.
Very good. Anybody else have any items they'd like to bring up and discuss?
Just one quick question, Paul. A couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting. You and Attorney DeLuca were gonna send a letter to Matt, Norwood Engineering, about what we talked about down on Yankee Spirit property. Did that ever happen, or is that something that needs to go back into executive session to talk about?
Yeah, I missed that on my status report. I have a meeting tomorrow with Mr. Spiegel and David Chilinsky, an architect with a design studio in Cambridge. Mr. Chilinsky was the architect for the Legacy Place project, and I've seen some of his other work. I provided the site plan to David Chilinsky, and he marked it up with some conceptual changes, a few different scenarios. It involved chopping off some of the unfinished building and reducing the leasable square footage on the site. He showed a conceptual design that flipped the drive-through to the front of the building and provided an escape lane. He also showed landscaped islands with more green landscaping on the side. I provided those conceptual designs to Mr. Spiegel, and he was less than thrilled with any of them. Tomorrow at 11, we have a meeting, and I will be serving as the mediator, facilitator to try to find some common ground and resolution to this. So I'm in progress of working on that. At this point in time, I'm not overly optimistic that Mr. Spiegel is going to be willing to make any significant changes to his building, even though the building's built on slab and not finished and could probably be reconfigured a little bit without a lot of effort. Mr. Spiegel did tell me that he has more than one national chain interested in leasing the building, and that he's interested in getting the building finished and leasing it up. And so that's where we stand on it.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Sheehan, did you have a question, sir?
Just on the upland property, we're just still waiting. We haven't heard much on that. Were they going to be coming in today?
Yes. As I mentioned, there were 4 bids on the Forbes Hill property. And one of the bidders has filed a protest. There was a hearing last week, and the judge issued a 1-week injunction to stay or stop the sale of the property to Continental. It was for that reason that Continental chose not to meet with the board, since they're instructed by a judge to put the brakes on the project. There's going to be another hearing, I think, later this week, and we'll see what happens. Because it's litigation, I really shouldn't go into any more detail than that.
Okay.
What was the point, Paul, of their bid litigation?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that would be going into more detail, wouldn't it?
No.
Which I would be glad to talk with you offline.
Just for that, we'll keep going here. We won't close the meeting. No. Anybody else have anything? Okay, at this point, take a motion to close this evening's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
And Mr. Sheehan, a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Mr. Sheehan, for the roll call.
Aye.
Mr. Patrikowski.
Aye.
Mr. Bamber.
Aye.
Mr. Hatchie.
Aye.
And the chairman, aye. 5-0 to close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you.